Okay, I'm going to introduce our afternoon speaker. I should just introduce myself. I'll read what it says here. I'm an independent consultant in research ethics. And I think I've been appointed to the SRA ethics chair. I always call myself the convener of the ethics forum. But thank you for the promotion. I appreciate it. Just to note, I couldn't properly download the app because somebody hacked my phone and email, so I've been out of contact for 2 days, which is unfortunate. However, there will be microphones for questions at the end. So we'll do it in the old-fashioned way. Talking about the old-fashioned way, this made me think about this, and I remember the first time we were introducing computers into a college I taught at, and there was a resistance from the lecturer in English to have, and the computers was something called Amstrads. Now that's going to be before many people's time here, and he was strongly resistant on the grounds that the tail was wagging the dog. I think about that all the time when we're talking about AI. I wonder if we have to be have caution in terms of the potential for the tail to wag the dog. And in the previous sessions, I've noted that cautionary approach, and when mistakes have been made, we've certainly learned from them. And I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more from Matteo this afternoon, because he's sponsoring this session, his company is sponsoring this session, and a sponsor of the conference. So we wish to thank you for that as well, Matteo.
Thanks for inviting us.
I don't know how much exactly it's going to cost you, but I'm sure it'll be reasonable. There will be drinks afterwards, I understand. Yeah. Matteo Cera is the CEO and co-founder of Glaut. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's an AI native end-to-end customer research software. Glaut allows researchers to program and run large-scale qual and quant research projects, leveraging AMIs. I like that, AMIs, AI-moderated voice interviews. It's always good to have a good, memorable acronym.
Absolutely.
And it operates in 50 languages. And he's had more than 15 years' experience in tech. And he began his career at McKinsey & Company and graduated summa cum laude from Bocconi University. So, the floor is yours, Matteo.
For the introduction, and hi, everyone. I have to say I'm in the best position right now. You don't know how cooler it is here versus up there. I'll try to be quick. I'm Matteo. I am the CEO and co-founder of Glaut, and as you can see, I'm also the design officer from the great presentation and mistakes on the first page. But basically, last night I was trying to convert this presentation from a more provocative to a less provocative title. We are here to introduce you to AI-moderated interviews as an evolution to quantitative research. AI-moderated interviews are a new research methodology that we pioneered together with other companies as well back in 2023. And instead of walking you to, why to use it, hi, sorry I started. Great to meet you, and thanks for your work. Instead of telling you about AMI's AI-moderated interview by themselves, I'll show you the results of 3 independent research and research studies where we basically asked some external research institutes to study the methodology and show us and you as researchers the potential, the benefits, and also the limitations of it. Just raise your hand. How many qualies do we have here? Oh, wow, that's a lot. And how many more quantitative researchers? Yep. How many of you have heard about AI-moderated interviews before? Oh, wow, a lot, great. 2 years ago, it was obviously 0, and I'm glad that now somehow the methodology came out. And how many of you use them already? Okay, a few. So why did we start AI-moderated voice interview was to bridge a gap between scale and depth. As you probably know, this is an example from political research where basically, historically, public opinion, political polls have been not really good at figuring out what people are going to vote. We usually use this way of asking, are you going to vote A or B? We don't know why. We don't know why people change their mind during the course of an election period. And basically, we measure things, but we don't really understand why. So we asked ourselves, could the missing depth being an issue of the design methodology that we use to figure things out? As you know, surveys have gone a long way in the past 110 years or so. Right now, the main ways of conducting survey is still online. And as we know, it has some pitfalls. Very long experience, static, not personalized, some open questions here and there, and unfortunately even very low incentives, which, as you know, have triggered a lot of issues in the research space. So the first question we're going to try to ask ourselves is, what if the research instrument is the constraint in social research? And we want to introduce you to AI-moderated interviews as a way to bridge that gap between the quantitative approach, the rigor, the statistical significance of quant research, and the depth that you can get through qualitative research. What are AMIs? AI-moderated interviews are similar to surveys in a way that they are asynchronous and they are structured or semi-structured. So the researcher can decide still what are the key questions and what is the sequence between the key questions to be asked to the respondent, to the patient, to the citizen. However, differently from surveys, you have the option as a researcher to give instructions about probing and follow-up questions that the software will understand and ask to the respondent. So it becomes a true conversation between the software and the respondent. We do allow voice answers as our primary way of data collection. And this is a big step change because, as we know, nobody really, well, we all type a lot during the day. But our hypothesis is that through voice, people will express themselves more freely. And finally, because of the power of technology, we are able to create projects that are multi-language by design. So we can basically interview people in 15 different languages in parallel, have those verbatim being translated in real time, and have them analyzed in a single project language, English, for example. So this is the tool. The question now is, The question now is, can we successfully use it in social research? And in order to answer to this question, we asked, as I said, to 3 independent research institutes, 2 universities, and 1 agency to conduct experiments regarding different angles of AI-moderated interviews against or versus other traditional research methodologies. What I'm going to show you today is 3 studies, University of Mannheim and Human Highway, that basically compared AI-moderated interviews against static surveys, and Curtin University that compared AI-moderated interviews against human moderator. So let's start from the 2 studies that focus on AI-moderated interviews against surveys. So on the left, you see basically Mannheim, and we basically structured it in a way that in both cases, AI-moderated interviews and the static survey had the same questions. However, the main difference was that in AMIs, the follow-ups were personalized to what the person would actually answer, versus in the static approach, like a survey, there was the same amount of follow-ups, but being predefined. So for example, if I ask you, what's your priority, what should be the government priority today, and I answer economy, Amy would follow up asking, can you tell me more? And I could answer the inflation. Okay, what about the inflation is of your concern? and I could say the rising cost of rents. So through an AMI, we would go from the economy to the cost of life, especially in rents. In a standardized approach, we usually, at the moment, ask only, what's your primary concern? And I would answer anyway, the economy. But most surveys would stop there. So the level of depth that we get is very low. In this approach, however, we did program 2 additional follow-ups to basically mimic the AMI approach, but they were not personalized, so they were general follow-ups. Could you tell me more? Could you make me an example? 100 respondents on one side, 100 respondents on the other side. In Human Highway, on the contrary, we actually introduced a new variable as well. We did AMI against surveys, but we allowed the AMI being answered by voice only to measure if the way of answering could lead to a difference. By the way, these studies and everything we did about research on research is published on our website, glaut.com/research. So you can see all the results there in the white papers. Now the interesting part, we didn't want to influence, obviously, the counterparts, so they came out with some measurements, some KPIs, that could be used to compare the 2 methodology. In this case, Mannheim chose verbosity, unique words, and lexical diversity in terms of the linguistic quality, and then performed a thematic analysis and compared the number and quality of codes coming out on one and the other. And finally, they measured participant experience, and this was self-reported. Human Highway had a similar approach. They had a few more metrics, a little bit more complicated, but basically was the same concept and the same framework. Let's look at the results. So this is Mannheim. In terms of verbosity, AIM scored 39% more words. I know more words doesn't mean more insights or better insights. So we agree on that. But again, we had to find a common ground of what metrics to use to compare the 2 methodologies. In terms of unique words, we even seen a larger gap. And also in terms of lexical diversity, we've seen a 12% increase in terms of the set of differentiated words used. Human Highway was similar, but the main driver of difference was the voice. When voice was activated, the gap that was similar to the previous study, the light pink versus the dark color, so static and AMI overall, the voice is really what's driving the biggest change, the biggest improvement. So in all the metrics regarding linguistic quality, AMI scored higher. This is another point, the third one, about participant experience. In this case, we really did not have any idea, any measurement, previous measurement about it, because our customers are research agencies, and when they get projects, they don't want to ask the participant as part of the project, how did you feel about the experience? So we didn't have any previous measurement about it. So this was the first time that we actually measured this, and it was for us very telling. So generally speaking, you see about a 6% improvement in terms of the aggregated experience score of AMI compared to the static, so a bit better. But what I point you out is in every one of the seven dimensions that the aggregated score is calculated with, AMI ranked better. In this one, it looks like worse, but actually it's a false negative because I encountered repetitive questions, and AMI had a lower score, so it was positive at the end. So this was, for us, a very important finding in a way. Passing on to AI moderation against human moderation. In this case, the research questions that we had to Curtin University were, are AI interviewers as effective as human interviewers? And what's a participant experience? What are the people saying when, or feeling when they are getting interviewed by a human versus by a software? The numbers are lower, so we had about 30 respondents in both cases. And we had a very interesting approach. I really like this study because Curtin measured 3 biometric measures: heart rate, facial expressions, and basically skin conductance, sweat, so stress measured on skin. And then there were also a few dimensions that were self-reported. As we know, this is the very first study that has been published, and the first white paper published on AI moderation against human moderation, so we were very excited about it. Insight number 1, not really surprising. Humans create stronger emotional connection than machine. And it is, I would say, rightly so, and it will be like that for a while, I feel, maybe forever. This was measured as facial expression, there is a mistake. It's actually measured like heart rate, so the second and third dimension are measured through the biometrics, but the first one was actually self-reported. Insight number 2, although, is that AI matches humans in terms of being able to open up the participant, the disclosure, the openness of the respondent. So these are all self-reported. They were not measured by biometrics, but there were no statistical difference between the two approaches in terms of disclosure and openness. And insight number 3, AI does not increase the level of stress. That does not mean that using Glaut, participant will have a better experience, but what we know is that they don't have a worse experience. And that's already a start. When you have to interview 500 people in 10 different languages and you have a week to go, you know that the participant experience will not be affected. As you can see, I'm sorry, this is a lot of numbers. We already spoke about joy and engagement, where human interviewers perform better than software. But in all other metrics, all negative stress-related metrics, anger, disgust, fear, sadness, there was no significant difference between AI moderation and human moderation. To wrap up, what we concluded from this study is that when emotional connection is really central to the research goal, when empathy and personal connection is part of the insight, we would still decide to use human interviewers, especially if we can have a small-scale project. On the other hand, whenever we plan traditional surveys, whenever our research goal is about disclosure, reasoning, explaining a certain decision, AI moderation works as good as, and in some cases even better. Let me now jump to a few very quick case studies of how people actually used AMIs in real world. Researchers from different research agencies that had the opportunity of using Glaut in their projects. This is a project about patients' engagement, so pharma-related. The KPIs, the performance indicator we usually measure, are the level of depth in terms of how many topics, themes in thematic analysis emerge from follow-ups versus only the first question. And in this case, 60%, so 2 out of 3 of the topics emerged in thematic analysis of the open-ended questions used in this project were actually originated by follow-up questions. You remember the example I made before about economy, inflation, cost of rents. Those are topics or subtopics, actually one of the other. 60% of them emerge from follow-ups, which means that if you did not use AMI, they would have not being originated. A bit of numbers about this case study: 4 minutes average interview length, 93% completion rate. This was outstanding for the client because it was doctors that usually wouldn't pick up the phone or would just reschedule 20 times. In this case, the doctors would be able to take the interview, the AMI, whenever and wherever they wanted, from a tablet, from desktop, from mobile, while driving, anywhere, and 93% completion rate. 300 cases, 12 days of field work. This is a second case where a social research agency was doing a European case study, a European project on European identity, values, and principles. In this case, they interviewed people across 5 different countries, 5,290 people in 15 days. In terms of depth, KPI explained before, 67% of topics emerged from follow-up questions, 72% completion rate. And finally, this was about a tracker, we call it a qualitative tracker, that we conducted back in the 2024 election cycle. In these cases, it was a longitudinal case study, longitudinal project. We had a number of waves. In total, we interviewed 1,400 people, 8 minutes average length. When reading the verbatim, that was the time we realized we were onto something, because the verbatims were so much rich in content versus the standard political opinion polls that you read on the newspapers, that it was very exciting for us. So to wrap up, in terms of what are the benefits that we have seen, richness of the answers, 60 to 80% of the topics were actually emerging from follow-ups and not from first answers. Between 70 and 90% completion rate, so kind of similar to standard traditional quant research. Multi-language capability and the ability of scaling very fast to multiple language, multiple countries, and being able to basically field hundreds or thousands of interviews in a matter of days or a couple of weeks instead of several weeks or months. Obviously, this is still the beginning. We do have an open request for research partners where basically we would like to study more about how AI moderation work, where they do and where they don't. So we are aware that these are, so far we have conducted 6 research on research projects. We would love to do 60 of them, time and resources constraints, but yeah. So the invitation is that whoever would like to study more about this methodology, we would be happy to sponsor them with the platform, basically the LLMs powering the interviews and the translation and the coding, and basically leave you the independency of conducting the study and publishing the results. Good or bad, we don't care. We just want to learn more about where do they work better and where actually they don't work as good. Thank you. I appreciate your time. Yeah, we do have a few minutes.
Okay, any questions? And we'll move the mic. Got some over here. Well, we'll do this one first.
Thank you. That was super interesting, and definitely see the positives of using AI-moderated interviews. I had a question that might not necessarily be relevant because I don't know when you come in the research process, but have you had any instances where you're having to screen for AI respondents? And that's something that I think we found in our organization.
Yeah,
Thank
the
you.
so-called bots. Because we have we have never faced so far, it will come, it's just not profitable yet. We've never faced voice AI bots, so voice AI answering to voice AI from our software. But we have encountered a lot of people that were, for example, we think copying and pasting results from ChatGPT, for example. We have encountered a lot of people that were trying to trick the identity anti-fraud mechanism. And that sparked a lot of product innovation on our side. So for example, when we use some panel providers that we know that might have that issue, we can activate voice-only answer. That means the respondent will only be able to talk back and not type the answer. We do usually provide both options, but we've seen that when you eliminate the keyboard, the bot doesn't have a way to type the answer, to programmatically type the answer. So we do voice-only mode, we call it, and that's the best anti-fraud that we have found so far. But it's an evolving battle where fraudster will come out with new ways of trying to trick the system. So another mechanism that we used quite a lot, we call it, it's basically another piece of the software that looks at the interview while it's being held and judges if the person is collaborative or not. And what does this other piece of the software do is that if the person does not answer or starts answering gibberish or just say, skip the question, go to next, it will exclude the question. So think about it as a person watching the interview and excluding a candidate that doesn't want to answer in a collaborative way. Those two things were our first trial of fighting that side of the fraud.
Okay, over there in the back.
So you mentioned on one of your slides that one of the benefits of using AMY as opposed to alternative methods is when you want consistency and comparability.
Yep.
My question is, given that the AI in these cases is introducing follow-ups depending on what it's been asked, there's sort of 2 points. One being, is that going to introduce some bias potentially? So might respondents be using the same language and concept that the AI has just used, for example? Does it introduce the risk of that? And then on the comparability, does it become much harder to consider the data in any way statistically representative or certain in terms of proportionality, given that you don't know who might have given certain answers? They've been asked different questions, essentially.
Yeah. The straight answer is yes. It is definitely a lower level of comparability compared to a standard quant survey that has exactly the same questions. But the way we created Glaut is skewed towards rigor. So what that means is that the software will accept a set of key questions which will always be asked in the same sequence with the same wording as a survey. But between a key question and the next one, we allow probing and follow-ups within the instructions, the prompt that the researcher decides. So the researcher can be very specific, very detailed, and somehow limit the level of not predictability of what the prompts are versus allowing the software to just figure out what type of follow-up to do. But it's a spectrum, and I agree with you, it is less rigorous than a pure quant. It's skewed to the quant side, but a little bit on the qualitative one.
I've got a really quick question.
Yep.
Is one of the 50 languages Welsh? And if it is, can the software cope with people speaking Welsh and English at the same time? Because people will use English words within Welsh conversation.
Definitely the second is a yes. So the software has the capability of basically switching language inside of the same interview and understanding two different languages while they're speaking. Regarding Welsh specifically, it's the first time, so we haven't done yet a study in Welsh. If Manuel my colleague takes your email, we would be happy to make it happen. So there is a library of languages that are sufficiently battle tested, and we would have to check if Welsh is within them and come back to you.
There was one other question down here, but the hand's gone down again. So do you want to come down to the front, Patricia? Sorry.
By the way, with languages, it's languages and accents. So for example, for English, we have 7 different South Africa, Nigeria English, obviously United Kingdom, US accents.
Thank you. Just thinking about using Amy's instead of human moderation.
Yeah.
What thinking have you done in terms of safeguarding? I'm thinking about large-scale interviews that can happen whenever participants want to do them, so maybe they do them in the middle of the night. I understand that we might not use Amy's for certain subjects, but from my experience, safeguarding issues and disclosures can come from anywhere. So what thinking have you been doing around how to handle those processes?
Let me understand a little bit more. So you mentioned an example of being in the middle of the night and safeguarding. What situation are you thinking of?
Yeah, so if someone says something during an interview that as a human moderator, I might think they're at risk of serious harm, and that my duty as a moderator and social researcher would be to work out a process where they get the support they needed. I might escalate that. Obviously, Amy isn't a human, so they might, can they make those sorts of judgments? And have you worked with agencies where you put sort of formal disclosure policies in place or anything like that?
Yeah. The example that comes to my mind is we are working with pharma research companies in spotting or at least giving alerts to the so-called adverse events that might happen during the interview of a patient or a person that was basically exposed to some adverse events. And technologies that are used to raise an alert then a human would look at instead of managing it by itself. So if the adverse event happens, the software will be able to basically soften the interview and interrupt it and raise the alert to the human person, which the next day or so will review it. But it doesn't happen in real time because they are asynchronous. Having said that, LLMs, providers, so the electricity that we use 2 years ago were very different from now. So every software that use general LLMs, think about Anthropic, think about OpenAI or whoever, will inherit the base safeguards that were created in the past couple of years and that are now, frankly, very strong about language used, type of conversation to be held, and how to manage it. On top of it, there is our part as a software and the research instructions, which means the researcher can, per project, give specific instructions about if they mention A or B, behave like this. So there are two sets of instructions that can help manage the situation. Not perfect, though.
Thanks very much. It's time for tea, as they say.
Yeah.
I think that tail is wagging really well, as far as I'm concerned. I wish Amy well, also. Yeah. And Matteo and his colleague Manuel will be around, so do ask them the questions. And the collaborative opportunity, I think, is a really valuable one. So it's an opportunity. Take it up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.